So one of the most common questions I ask my students is, what do you value in art? That question can reveal an awful lot about someone, and I'm often quite surprised at how difficult it is for many people to answer. And this is true from the novice to the most experienced artist across a variety of mediums. If you don't know the answer to that question, I recommend figuring it out because I think it's one of the best things you can do for yourself as someone who creates art. I often make my students create a list of the things they value in a given art form or across multiple art forms. This list doesn't need to be ranked, but it's often a really fun exercise to see what the number one priority is when you are forced to say the things you value in art. I'm often surprised at how common it is that students can't come up with a single idea or term to describe something it is that they value in art. And that doesn't mean they don't value something in art. They do, but we often as creative individuals don't take the time to step back and critically think about the component parts of a given art form or multiple art forms that we value or that we think are important or make art good or worth experiencing. So why do this at all? Well, it's going to help focus your creative efforts towards the things that you value the most, so that you're always putting your best foot forward, or at least your most meaningful foot forward. If you're really into complex rhythmic generation, well then start your pieces with complex rhythms. Start at the thing that you value the most so that you're not creating arbitrary art and that you aren't sort of filling in the blanks along the way for the things that are the most important to you. If rhythm is important, start with rhythm. If harmony is super important to you, if we're talking about music, if you really are interested in chords and sonorities, well, make sure you are starting there so that your music demonstrates the things that you value, which again, could be rhythm, could be harmony, could be a whole bunch of other things. I'll use myself as an example. Here are some things that I really value in music. It's not all of them, and they're not ranked. I'm just showing you some of them to give you an idea of the things that are important to me when it comes time to create art. So for example, I'm really into timbre, something I call economy of form, which I'll talk about in a second, and there are some other terms that could be used for that. I talk about layers, or in my case, too many layers. I like lots of things happening all at once in the music that I listen to, and often the music that I create. I like intricate and evolving textures that really sort of shift and move and change over time. And I'm also a really big fan of sort of pattern-based music, but not in the traditional groove sense. I like really difficult to perceive and slowly evolving patterns over time. Now, that's just a small example of some of the things that I value in art, but your list is going to be quite different. And really, the list can include anything. I mean, it can be really precise. Like you could list major seventh chords as a thing you value, and you're going to start with nothing but major seventh chords. And let's be honest, the major seventh chord is a wonderful chord. It can be more general, like I like crunchy tone clusters. Cool, you like really crunchy, tight little harmonies, so that's maybe where you're going to start creating your music. It can be super abstract. I like art that is void of the human spirit. If that's a thing that is of value to you, then that's a place that you may want to begin. Or whatever it is. There's no right or wrong way to go about these things. It's your list and it's your set of values. It can be whatever it is that you want it to be, but being consciously aware of the things that you value can be so, so important. And again, this is common in my experience across artists of all sort of experience levels, but it's definitely more common for beginners. So if you are new to creating material, again, whether it's music or film or visual arts of other kind, it doesn't really matter. This can be true across all artistic pursuits. I highly recommend you take a moment to sit back and think to yourself, what is it that I value with the music that I listen to or the films that I watch? Why do I like film A but not film B? What qualities does this film have that I value? And can I make sure I am exploiting that when I create my own art and using those components to their fullest potential? That's something you really should be doing, and it's something that when I started doing and becoming critically aware of, it really, really helped my creative process. Now, of course, this list will change over time. The list I showed you a minute ago was not the list I would have had when I was an 18-year-old freshman composition major in my undergraduate degree. I was really valuing really different stuff back then. And the things that you will value will change over time based off what you create, but also what you take in, which is why it's so important to take in a really broad variety of art in all mediums, forms, genres, styles, eras, so that you know and can be aware of what you do or do not value. I quite literally keep a running list. I have various documents. Sometimes it's handwritten, but these days it's like a cloud storage text document that includes things I value in art. And I don't often remove things these days because I like to sort of have a record of it, but I might sort of like put a cross through it if it's not important anymore. But I like to add things to it all the time. And sometimes that's a very particular word or a very particular thing. Sometimes certain elements will move further up the list and some will move further down. It really just depends on what I'm listening to and what I'm creating. But I like the idea of this sort of running log of things that were important to me at different points in my life. So again, it should change, and it's really fun to compare the things you value in art now compared to 10 years down the road. I wish I had done this when I was like 18 and starting my musical career formally, at least in academia. I think that would have been really interesting to compare. So in terms of using this to help your creative process, then, what I always recommend is start with the thing or things that you value most. So for example, I listed timbre because the quality of a sound is just my favorite thing. It is the bee's knees, and I can spend so much time just shaping an individual sound before I put it in context. And I can create thousands of sounds, whether that's from sample manipulation or synthesizers, which is my kind of go-to these days. I can just have so much fun doing that. It is by far the most interesting part of a musical experience to my ears. I create unique and interesting sounds first because that's what I value. And then what's great is the rest of the project that I'm working on can grow naturally and organically onward from that place of value because I began somewhere substantive that is meaningful to me and not meaningful to others. When you do this, the art you create is not forced, it's not arbitrary, and it's going to be meaningful to you, and I believe that meaning translates to the person who is listening to or experiencing your art. Now, as mentioned, this works incredibly well beyond music. I focus on music because I'm sort of a musician first, but if you know me, you know I also do a lot of video and film stuff, and it's really meaningful to me. So I had already mentioned how I value what I called economy of form. There might be other and better terms for that, but what I mean by that is art that doesn't have excess, like no fat to trim, so to speak. And it only really has what is absolutely necessary to convey the artistic intent. Now, this is more difficult to narrow down in music as it's a naturally abstract art form, because there's that really dangerous game. You can be like, hey, what if you cut this 1/16th note from this 3-hour long opera? Would the whole piece collapse? Well, then cut that 16th note. That's a hard exercise to do, but I think it's a little bit easier to apply to, say, filmmaking, because it's sort of more traditionally narrative in its structure. So it's easier to focus on what is excessive in a film versus music. I'm not saying you can't discuss that in music. I think it's just a little easier in film. I'm going to take as an example the movie Clue. If you have not seen the movie Clue, you should absolutely see it. It is perfect with regards to having no excess at all. It's just also one of my favorite movies of all time. But there's not a single wasted line, not a single useless word, not a single pointless syllable. It's incredible how surgical and precise that movie is at telling what it needs to tell. Everything serves the narrative goal and either reveals useful information or advances the plot in a meaningful way. It's also hilarious, and Tim Curry is a comedic genius, and we should all be thankful that we got to live at the same time as him. So watch the movie Clue, and if you have other examples of art that you think is really great with regards to what I call economy of form, let me know. I'd be really curious as to other films, musical examples, whatever it might be. Another benefit to all this is that you can realize areas that are of less value to you that are often underutilized. And in fact, this might be the most important lesson you can take away from this. If you value timbre like I do, then yes, start with timbre. I think that's a really important way to sort of meaningfully grow your compositions. But don't ignore the other stuff, because you might find that you often are. So to sort of go back what we were talking about a second ago, harmony. Harmony is something that these days, and for the last several years of my life, I just don't care nearly as much. I'm just so done with notes and chords and your little pitch structures and your little schemes and your little charts. They're just notes. Whatever, just they're notes, you know what I mean? And for me, the notes are just like a vessel to carry interesting timbres forward. It's like toast. No one likes toast. People like butter or or like potatoes. No one likes baked potatoes. They like bacon bits and butter and chives and cheese and all these sort of things. Notes to me are potatoes, and I'm no longer interested in them. I'm interested in what goes on top of them. So I would recommend, if there are things that you realize you don't value as much, that you make sure to spend some extra time on those to make sure they are not lost in your composition, because I don't really value notes and chords in the way I used to, but if I completely ignore those, it's going to hurt the end result of my artistic creation. So I can't just completely leave it off, but it might might not be where I start, which is really important, because what I have found is that people often start creating art based off what they valued when they were young, and they don't sort of catch up with themselves based off the new things they value. So I seriously recommend you make a list. Type it up, write it by hand, whatever. Just get it written down. Then use it to focus your creative energy going forward in a variety of ways and watch how that list changes over time. It's a really exciting exercise. Compare lists with friends. Let me know some of the things that you value in art. I would be really curious. So with all that in mind, go make some art.